Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the SafeHouse Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co-chair of the SafeHouse Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. Welcome back to episode 2 of 3, Incident Response, Prepare, Respond, and Fortify with Luke Emrich. Luke, why don't you give our new listeners and a refresher for the ones who joined us in episode 1, a quick overview of your background?
Sure. I shared half the story last time, but I'm going to change it up a little bit this time. So we talked about how art drove my path to incident response. As I was graduating college, my first job, I worked at a local bike shop. And one of the individuals that I worked at the bike shop also went through the same cybersecurity program that I did at school. And as I was graduating college, it was in 2010, just after the 2008 recession, and it was pretty difficult to break into the space. So my friend there, who had been working for a couple years in the industry, reached out to me and said, "Hey, I got a place for you to live, an extra bedroom in my wife and my house, and a position if you're interested. Do you want to pack up and move to New York City and kind of start your first job?" And it was a no-brainer. I had worked for him and his family at the bike shop and had a good relationship with him. And it was like going to work for my first big boy job with a friend that I already knew. So that's how I got started and broke into this incident response world after graduating college.
Nice. That's a lot of fun. You know, first your art drives you to incident response, and then you jumped on your bike and rode into incident response. A lot of fun. Yeah. So today we're going to talk and get under the hood a bit on a cyber breach or ransomware attack and how to best respond to it. So you've been in the trenches for 10 years, hundreds, maybe thousands of, incidents you've been a part of or, coached. When you first arrive on the scene, it's like, you're a fireman, you arrive at the fire, you go, okay, where do I begin? So if you're to break it down and how you respond, you got a situation, what are the first things first that you start to do and then to unpack how to tackle this thing?
Yeah, I like that. So we, as an incident response company, get brought into our engagements in many different paths. You spoke with Robert Walker in the past, who's a breach coach that we work with. So many times the inbound or the request for help comes from the law firm that the organization has been engaged by. Sometimes the inbound comes from the insurance carrier that they're working with. Sometimes the clients reach out to us directly. Maybe they have an incident response retainer with us. Okay. Or another option is maybe there's an IT provider that they're working with that has a relationship with us. Those are a couple different inbound channels, but whichever one is at play, the process always starts with a scoping call. And it's us getting on the phone with the client and walking through what they know so far, asking questions about the incident, their network. And it's really a high-level conversation, back to your elephant analogy. Like, we've got the blindfolds on and we're touching that elephant. We're trying to figure out, is this a baby elephant or is this an adult elephant? And how severe is this incident? And during that process, we're asking questions that will help us guide those response efforts. We might be asking, how do you remotely access your systems? Or what are the systems that are internet exposed? What are some of the tools and technology that you have in your environment? Because in our experience, many of those items are going to give us clues to what we need to hone in and investigate first. Maybe based on the ransomware threat actor group or the threat actor group, if it's identified. What's their MO? Do they target a certain technology that we know is in that organization's environment? Or I mentioned in the last episode that many times we'll do some open web research on our clients as they're coming in to understand what do they have exposed. We'll ask questions about those. Maybe I see the organization has a remote desktop exposed. They do. I can almost guarantee it's getting brute forced by every every bad guy out there, right?
Yeah.
And that might be something that we go look at first, or at least tell the client, we need to turn that off immediately before we even get off this call.
Okay.
So
So, yeah.
it always starts with a scoping call from that perspective to understand what is the situation that they're experiencing, what is the severity, and that's where the planning starts to get the response underway.
It's like if you're in like an emergency room doctor, kind of, okay, where are we at? Let's sit rep. Let's take a look at this. And then do you start to do triage and the communication? How does that work then?
Yeah, sometimes we do provide some direction and guidance on that call, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, many times we have to put contracting in place before we can go too far. But that
Mhm.
contracting process, we've got templates and turnaround very, very quickly from that perspective. After the contracting is approved, if necessary, by the carrier and all, the insurance carrier, then
Mm.
we're
Mm.
usually within hours getting engaged to start the evidence collection process, get our recovery team engaged to begin getting remote access to systems,
Okay.
to begin containing the event, evaluating the state of backups, and determining what's going to be the game plan to restore business operations in the shortest period of time, but also the safest way of restoring business operations based on what we know at that time. There is a balancing act in this process because if we wanted to use the most risk averse process, the approach would be we need to finish forensics and you need to rebuild every system from scratch. But in reality, that doesn't work for businesses. So
Right.
we need to come up with a game plan and strategy where we can evaluate that risk and take a risk-based approach to bring systems back online following an attack.
So you mentioned Robert Walker he's with Louis Brisboe and his boy, and he's part of their cyber team from a legal counsel and communications and management negotiations, things of that nature. So it sounds like you work closely with the legal, but also with the insurance company and as part of a team or a cadre, if you will, of responders. Is that how that works?
Yeah, I mean, it's yes, that is what happens. And it's every team member plays their role in my
Okay.
mind, right? So the insurance carrier in most cases is going to be footing a portion of the bill, whether the organization, if the organization has coverage, right?
Okay.
But you might ask, well, why do we need legal counsel involved? Don't we just need the forensics and don't we just need to restore business operations? Well, part of what you're being insured for is covering the cost associated with a data breach
Mm.
notification or notifying impacted parties of the event.
Hmm.
Me on the forensic side or on the incident response side cannot advise my clients on if they have any data breach notification requirements. That's legal counsel's job. What our job is to do is to
Okay.
advise the organization, what does the forensics tell us? I can tell them that the bad guy took this folder of files, but I can't tell you that you need to notify those people because that comes down to the laws, and every one of the 50 states has a different law on data
Yeah.
breach notification. So
Yeah.
legal counsel needs to be involved in my mind, every incident response engagement. And they do provide that help and guidance and direction on notification. But what they also do is cover the investigation, the forensic investigation with attorney-client privilege. And what this affords an organization protection around is if there was any litigation following the cyber attack or intrusion,
Yeah.
the organization is going to have additional legal kind of shields in place to prevent a opposing party from asking for a copy of our forensic report or the findings of our investigation.
Right.
That's something you're going to want to have in place.
Well, speaking of forensics, can you dive into that a bit more? What are the things that how it all comes about, and what the report is, and the sensitivity of it? It sounds like it's quite sensitive.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's been some recent, and this is probably prefacing this, probably swimming outside my swim lane a little bit here, but there's been some recent case law that has suggested that the forensic report following an incident response and investigation may not be covered by that attorney-client privilege.
Huh.
And what we're seeing happen more often, if I was to rewind, I think like 3 years now, we would be expected or asked to write a report for every single investigation that we do. But one of the attorneys that I work with recently told a client, and I liked this. We don't want to memorialize and document the bad story or the bad news necessarily. So many times, if we're seeing an organization has a data breach notification requirement, or their fiduciary duties are to notify impacted parties, 9 times out of 10, we're not getting asked to write a forensic report. We're usually getting asked to write a forensic report when we have good news. There was an incident, but none of that data was impacted, and the evidence tells us that we don't have to notify anybody. That's a good story to document and write a report around. So that's what we're seeing most often. I'm not saying that that is going to be the end all be all, or the way it's going to be every single time, but usually that's the way it trends.
So, of all the responses you've been involved in, do you have one that stands out without disclosing any details? But was there one that was kind of unique or kind of crazy beyond imagination you had to wrangle in, or all pretty much all crazy and to be expected kind of thing?
After you've been doing this so long, a ransomware event is a ransomware event is a ransomware event. And they blur together. There's one client that I had in the past, and we get on this scoping call, right? I've talked about the scoping call here.
Yep.
And it was an hour-long call, and the client spent probably the first 45 to 50 minutes of the hour arguing with the attorney that's on the call. Why isn't my rep from the insurance company on the call? And we already have another incident response company involved. Why is this other organization here on the call? Because your insurance company told us that this is who we're working with, right? Or this is who you're working with.
Right.
At the end of the call, I had about 3 minutes to ask enough questions to write a statement of work. Wow. And any scoping call, I don't want to say that we blindly write the statement of work, but in many cases, if I vaguely, roughly know the size of the organization, I can generally kind of lick my finger and put in the air, what's the level of effort going to take? Yeah. So I put together the statement of work. The only thing we got engaged for in that engagement was to do threat actor communications, reach out to the bad guy and negotiate. Basically, it started with information gathering. Did the bad guy take any data? Yeah. And then work with the client to determine if there was any desire to negotiate with them to buy a decryption key or to pay to suppress this data from being taken. Yeah. So I kind of come into the engagement as the hero because my job's easy. I reach out to the bad guy and say, hey, did you take any data? And they respond and say, yeah, here's a list. Here you go. So I turn that over to the client and help them through this. But the challenge is the organization had engaged another incident response company to work through the engagement. And I had no hard feeling about that. The challenge that I was faced with is I was seeing the updates that they were providing, and we were 2 weeks in, and the forensic provider said, we reviewed 4 computer systems in 2 weeks. And I said, this just isn't, they're not helping you. And they're calling out some things that really need to be investigated further. Yeah. But they're not. and you need to take this to the kind of the next level. So they ended up transitioning the investigation to the team that I was working for at the time.
Mhm.
And we were able to, in about a day and a half, be able to identify conclusively when the bad guy got into the network and what were the significant computer systems that they interfaced with or interacted with. We had an amazing team at the shop I was working with at the time to do that investigation. But the part that became that made this case so memorable for me, it was being that trusted advisor for the client. And even when we weren't doing the forensics in the beginning, it was being in a position where I could provide them background and feedback in a way I've always wanted to with another investigation, but I couldn't, because if I'm doing the investigation, I can only report on what we're finding from a evidentiary perspective.
Right.
If I'm not doing the investigation and I'm that trusted advisor, I can talk to you all day long about what are the trends that we often see and what are the things that we need to be looking for. At the end of the engagement, the organization invited me and my wife to come to their establishment to partake in their business. I'm just going to keep it very,
Nice.
very
Yeah.
vague. So, it went from a relationship where it was almost adversarial on that scoping call
Yeah.
to almost like a best friend at the end of it. And
Nice.
there's a lot of clients that I have. I reached out to one yesterday where we found out about a new vulnerability and just said, "Hey, I remember you're using this technology. I don't remember if you're using this version or that version, but there's a new vulnerability. Want to bring it to your attention." And it's nice to be able to kind of connect with your clients on that front.
So it sounds like in going through this, you have an incident response company potentially and technologies, right? That could be there. So for any given company, a small, mid-sized business, that'd be great to have in place. May not be in place, but could be put in place relatively quickly, as I understand what you're saying. But pretty much legal counsel is going to be there for future, to mitigate risk for future impacts to the company and to minimize exposures, whether it be from the forensics or other activities that happen contractually. And then your insurance company should be in place. So to have those three would be kind of the three basic pillars you should have in place as any business that's doing any operation. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah. So in our last episode, we talked a bit about planning and having the insurance policy in place for any organization, I think is almost imperative, right? Unless you want to, foot a potential cost out of pocket, right?
Yeah.
Now, probably more so for the small to medium-sized business, do you need to have an incident response retainer in place with an incident response company and a law firm that specializes in this space?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I almost think that is, in most cases, an incident response retainer is going to come with a decent sized price tag for pre-bought hours that can be used for incident response support. And in many cases, those hours can be transitioned to other services that organization may provide. But a little dirty secret on the industry that I think applies to most small to medium businesses is the law firms that play in this space and the incident response companies that play in this space need to cater to the hand that's feeding us. And in most cases, that's the insurance company, right? So if you're a small to medium business and you have an insurance policy, a cyber insurance policy, and you call them up and say, "Hey, Jeff, I've got a problem." It's in our best interest to jump as soon as we get that call. So that organization, when they start that outreach process, are going to get lined up with a law firm and are going to get lined up with an incident response company that are going to help them through that process. So yeah, the small to medium-sized business absolutely can purchase an incident response retainer, but do they need to? I don't know. I don't think so.
It's for everybody to make their own. So to that end, any final thoughts or suggestions that our SafeHouse Initiative readers and listeners can act upon today that you would give a couple of thoughts, just one thing they could do today?
For this episode, I want you to connect with your insurance carrier or insurance broker to review the coverage and policy that you have in place, making sure that the coverage is adequate and is in line with the needs of the business. Many of the insurance policies also provide you or afford you the ability to access preparation materials, so may provide access to complimentary or low-cost incident response planning exercises, incident response tabletops, template incident response plans that you might want to look into. So that would be the piece that I would recommend investigating.
Well, Luke, really, thank you ever so much for sharing your expertise and guidance with us. Looking forward to getting to episode number 3. So why don't we stay tuned for our next episode and get into fortification of our incident response plans.
Absolutely. Looking forward.
That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the SafeHouse Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information on the SafeHouse Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen. Send us an email at safehouseinitiative.org@gmail.com or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.